hung up the phone, went to my laptop, and booked a one-way ticket to San Francisco. And I had no job, I had no place to stay, but I thought, you know what? Let me just give it a shot. Like, let me try and see, give myself 6 months.
From the rise of impossible foods to McDonald's announcing their McPlant menu, plant-based food has undeniably taken the market by storm. Beyond the mainstreaming of veganism, fast forward to 2021, a global crisis and global lockdowns drove consumers to reassess what they eat and their impact on the planet. The end of the year saw analysts now predict the plant-based food market to grow by close to 12% by 2027, valuing it at $74.2 billion. Riding this wave is Clara Foods, a Silicon Valley venture-backed company making animal protein without the animals. Led by Arturo Elizondo, Clara Foods is disrupting food technology, developing performance protein products, and making the world's first animal-free egg white protein. Using advanced fermentation to brew protein that is cleaner, greener, and kinder to our environment, today we take a personal deep dive with the man behind the vision of eggs without chickens. You don't want to miss it. Welcome to Billion Dollar Moves, the show for the top US and Asia founders, funders, and execs. From the growing pains of a unicorn journey to IPO, scaling a venture capital firm, and the shift of wealth, we cover it all. Good afternoon, everyone. It is such a pleasure to be back here. So let's get started here, Arturo. I really want to, as I mentioned in the prelude, really want to get deep into your story. Texas boy decides to take a one-way ticket to San Francisco, never look back. And then here's the catch, right? Which is really not common to the story of the Silicon Valley journey, but that you've created an obsession for eggs. So tell us all about this. Where did this begin? Why? And all of the above, Arturo.
Such an interesting question. And, like you said, I think a lot of what ultimately led me to Clara and to found this company was from my own journey. I grew up in Texas and I'm Mexican by heritage. And so I grew up eating, like any good Texan, my barbecues every Sunday, and like any good Mexican, my 2 eggs for breakfast every morning. And I never thought about where my food came from until I began making my way in government. And I pursued government because, I felt very lucky in life. And I knew that I wanted to dedicate my life to something bigger than myself. And government for me was this way of, having an impact on a much larger scale. That if I could, change a law in one small way, it could impact the lives of millions of people. And that was really attractive. So I started working for my congressman in Texas. He sat in the Ag Committee in Congress, recommended me to the USDA, began working in the Food Safety and Inspection Service, FSIS for short, which is the largest part of the USDA that oversees and regulates every slaughterhouse in the country. And where once I learned, truly and literally like how the sausage is made, it was one of those things that I couldn't unsee, the kind of scale at which you produce animal protein. And the more time I spent learning about food, the more angry I became. Why had I not been taught this before? Like how come I never even connected the dots in terms of how to get the food that I was eating every single day to my table? I had no idea that we slaughtered over 1 million animals every single hour in the US alone to feed less than 5% of the world population. I had no idea that 80% of deforestation in the world could be directly tied to animal agriculture, that 3 out of 4 emerging infectious diseases are zoonotic, right? And the list goes on, that it takes over 600 gallons of water to make a dozen eggs. And the list goes on and on and on. And I thought there has to be a better way. Like, why do we have to accept that just because this food is tasty, that we have to destroy the planet in the process? is there another way to do this? And the more research that I did, the more I realized that the technologies of today are so different from the technologies of yesterday. And there was a real shot at using great technology to make the foods that we know and love, but produce them in a way that is more aligned with our values and has a smaller and kinder footprint on the planet.
So you have this realization, this sort of epiphany that I think we all have in some points in our life, right? Something just clicks. But
Uh,
tell us then, how do you take a revelation like that, a personal revelation, and
yeah,
say, okay, I'm going to do something about this? What was your strategy there? Did you even think that this would be a career that you would work on? I mean, it's been 6 years, but as we know, the founder journey for some, it's a lifetime. How did you start on that path?
yeah, and that was the $1 million. I mean, really, the $1 million question for me is how can I make an impact? I'm just a 20-year-old kid who wants to hopefully build be a part of building a better food system. But I had no idea what that looked like. I had no technical background. My background was mainly in government. Didn't think I was going to make a big impact in food and ag through my work in government until much later on. And so at that point, it was really possible of elimination. And I thought, well, maybe I can spend a couple of years in venture capital or at a hedge fund or build my career in some other place so that then I can build a skill set to then ultimately bring that to the food, to food technology in some shape or form. But I didn't know at all what that looked like. And I thought, I should just follow this path. I'd gone, studied in government, worked, went to Harvard, and now I was building the 5-year plan or 10-year plan that I had for myself. But I honestly, Sarah, it really was. It became an obsession, and I couldn't stop thinking about it. And everyone I talked to, I would, just use it as an opportunity to talk about the different companies in the space that were doing really great stuff. I had Google alerts for all these different topics. At some point, I thought, look, I'm going to be miserable at any other job because I can't.
Mm.
I won't be able to focus, and I won't be able to do a good job in any other job because my mind was going to be somewhere else. I was about to take a job actually in the Obama administration, and then I called my former boss at Credit Suisse,
Mhm.
who was also vegan and like super into the whole plant-based ecosystem. And I was like, hey, I'm about to take this job. It's amazing. It's a great launching pad for my career. And he's like, what are you doing? Like,
Yeah.
you should be in San Francisco, like working on food. Like, that's what you've been talking to me for the last year and a half. Like, what's going on? And in that moment, it hit me. And I was like, you're right. Like, what am I doing? And I thought, look, if not now, when? Literally, hung up the phone, went to my laptop, and booked a one-way ticket to San Francisco. And I had no job, I had no place to stay, but I thought, you know what? Let me just give it a shot. Like, let me try and see, give myself 6 months. If I fail miserably, at least I will have that peace of mind to say, all right, I tried it and I failed. Let me go back into government or into finance or something else and be able to have more clarity at that point. But I would have always wondered, what if I had not pursued it?
Yeah.
What if I had pursued it? And that was ultimately what made me really take that plunge.
Love it. Love it. And definitely see some similarities there. I still have my Google alerts actually. Curious to hear then, you arrive in San Francisco with this dream. How did you approach it? Did you sort of already have a mental map of, okay, let's start by putting the right people around me? But because again, you're not a technical founder, you came from government, right?
I'd done so much research. I knew who was working in food tech. I knew, I knew about all these companies. And actually, when I was still in Boston, a dear friend of mine connected me to Josh Falk, one of the founders of Hampton Creek, one of the first food tech companies in the space. I told him, look, I really want to get into the space in some shape or form. Like, who should I talk to? How can I learn more about this? And he was like, look, come to this conference with me and see if you meet the right people. And so 2 weeks later, I go to this conference At that point, Hampton Creek got sued by Unilever for the mayonnaise incident about the labeling. He doesn't end up showing up, and so I'm there by myself, and I find this empty seat. The only table with young people in it. It was like 50 people. It was one of the first ever food tech conferences back in 2014. This was 7 years ago. Back, before anyone even knew what Beyond Meat was or Impossible. And across the table from my future co-founders, Isha from New Harvest, and then Dave Anchel, my technical co-founder, molecular biologist by training, and then also the founders of Perfect Day, another alternative protein company. And we just got to talking, and my co-founder Dave shared with me this crazy idea that he had about making eggs without using chickens. I thought it was such a brilliant idea. And I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. And then a couple of days, we just kept talking about it. And a couple of days later, Isha and Dave approached me to then start this company and build a business plan to apply to IndieBio, which is the world's first biotech accelerator, and that's how they gave us our first $50K to build a prototype, and then it was all history from there.
And this is super interesting. You sort of gravitated to sort of a group that was already thinking about it. In picking
Mhm.
co-founders, this is a question that we don't talk about enough. How do you think about partnership here? What have you learned in having the team that you have now to be building such a ambitious vision, right?
Yeah, yeah. It's such a great it's such a to your point, it's something that doesn't get talked about enough. And a lot of it was serendipity. I hadn't met my co-founder until literally 2 weeks before we built the company. I know people who've spent years working with someone, or trying things out before they really know. And
Yeah.
for me, I mean, part of it was there. I mean, there weren't really that many people. What ended up working out well was we were so committed to creating this future, right? That we had all, in some ways, some shape or form, like had to come out of the woodwork and actively seek this space out, because this wasn't alternative protein 7, 8 years ago wasn't what it
Yeah.
is today. And so there's such few people and very few and far between. We over-index a lot for passion and mission, and that for me, with my co-founder, like he was willing to drop everything to make this happen, and so was I. And Isha had dedicated her career already to this this approach that it was one of those things where we have to act now. We have to get together. There's almost, it's almost like there's no choice. Like we're the only people right now who want this badly enough that are actually sitting at this conference trying to make it happen.
Mm. So then how did you all map sort of each of your roles? I mean, of course, in the early days, right? It's all hands on deck, do whatever that's necessary. But
Yeah,
as you now grow, I mean, you've got how many employees? It's going to be hitting 60 very soon. How do you think about that transition of roles? How did
yeah.
you all map it from phase one, phase two, phase three as a founding team?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I mean, I think we were very lucky in that, Isha was going to be supporting us more as an advisor because she was still leading New Harvest. And so it was really my co-founder, Dave, and myself. At that point, he's technical and I'm more, I'm just naturally more inclined to the business and strategy. And so I led, and so by default, I became the CEO. He became the CTO, leading the technology part of the business. And so that was, it was pretty straightforward early on. And then as the company grew, to your point, we were building a very very capital intensive and tech intensive business, which means that we have to also bring talent from the outside, from industry, right? And find these people, that are few and far between, that have, real, deep industry experience and have a heart for what we're doing. Because especially in the early days, like resilience is so important, because it takes a special kind of person to weather the roller coaster that is a startup, where you have the highs are just so incredibly high, and the lows are like gut wrenching. And in the same day, you have multiple of those, right? Where it's like you learn
Yeah.
something that could kill the company one moment, and then the second, an investor writes saying, "Hey, we're going to fund, we we want to put some more money into the company, or we get a great piece of feedback from a customer that just lights up the entire room. In retrospect, that was something that was hugely important for us to index for very early on. And so yes, now we're around 60 people, and we'll be over 100 by early next year. So we're looking to double the business as we continue now launching more products off the pipeline. But for the first several years, especially when you came to visit, we were like 90% R&D in terms of our headcount, because we needed to develop the technology before we could even sell it. Right. And so now we have a much more balance where it's probably now 65, 70% R&D, and then the rest, G&A, marketing, sales, and business development.
Got it. Talk to me a little bit about the approach. Of course, I think connected because of the fermentation angle of some of the startups that I was looking at. But for the audience, this concept of how is he doing this? Is this even possible? Does it have the same taste, texture? Tell us a little bit about the approach of the technology, and let's get geeky here.
Again, growing up in Texas and Mexico, my mom and my family, if you put the word vegan on it, or they automatically, push away from it because they think it's not going to taste good. And I knew that for us to be successful, we had to make products that truly were delicious, that we could lead with a product first approach, that products that were amazing and that just so happened to be vegan, but that we weren't leading with that we were leading with amazing kick-ass products to begin with. I knew that if we didn't meet people exactly where they're at, we were only going to be able to appeal to the San Franciscans and New Yorkers of the world, right? The people on the coast. And I wanted a product to be for every human on the planet. And that meant that we had to hold ourselves to an incredibly high bar, and that we needed a technology that could rise to the occasion. And that's why we decided to go after precision fermentation specifically. And what it means is that it enables us to make literally the exact same proteins that are found in animals. So through our fermentation technology, we can make proteins that have the same exact taste, texture, nutritional profile, and amino acid profile. They are, by every sense of the word, identical to what the animal makes. So we can make real animal protein without ever using a single animal. And as crazy as it sounds, because it does sound crazy to make real animal protein without using animals, the technology has been around for 40 years. The insulin was actually the first ever animal protein made without using an animal. And that was for diabetics. And we needed to kill 50,000 pigs to make 1 kilo of insulin that was used for every diabetics before the 1980s. So if you had diabetes, you had to get this insulin from animals, and it wasn't vegan, it wasn't kosher, it wasn't halal, it wasn't vegetarian, but you needed this life-saving protein. And that's how every single person got their insulin protein from. Now, fast forward to today, over 99% of insulin is made using fermentation. And so we thought, look, this technology is incredibly powerful, and it's mainly used in pharma for a lot of different therapeutics, a lot of different drugs. But we said, can we actually apply the same technology to a problem that I specifically find incredibly urgent, and say, well, can we replace, animal proteins from the food system as well using the same technology? And the way that it works is that in the same way that brewers use yeast to convert sugar into alcohol to make beer or wine, or in the same way that bakers use yeast to convert sugar into carbon dioxide to leaven bread, the yeast that we work with naturally converts the same sugar but into protein. To make any other kind of insulin, any kind of animal protein, is that we insert the DNA sequence that codes for that specific protein into the yeast. So as the yeast eats sugar, instead of making any kind of protein, it actually is making that specific protein that is encoded by that DNA sequence. So we use the yeast as a little computer. And instead of zeros
and I just want to pause there because this is another interesting fact that not many viewers would know, right? You can today 3D print that sequencing and that DNA, I think you source it literally through a database, right? That's how
Exactly.
you, yeah,
Exactly.
interesting.
So in online databases, you can find almost every major protein known to man. So all the egg proteins, all the milk proteins, so many of the human proteins, so many proteins are already on these databases. And so we essentially have a company 3D print those DNA sequences for us, the way that they do to make all kinds of proteins for the biotech industry that's been around for decades. And we have them 3D printed for us, and then we basically mix that with our yeast. The yeast, integrate that DNA and then start producing and 3D printing that protein. And again, the protein is identical, and the body is able to receive it in the same exact way. And that's why for us it was really important. I'm not, we're trying to change the process, not the product. It's how do the factory farming model should not exist in the 21st century. This technology is destroying our lives as humans, but also the health of the planet. And so if we can really change the process and make it not just more sustainable, but actually more efficient, right? That we can make it now more cost competitively and at the same time, really save the planet in the process, or at least help in averting this climate crisis. Why not?
So tell us then about the product. I know you've released, was it Posine Pepsin? Did I get that right? Was that your first product?
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. So we've spent the last 6 years developing the core technology around how do we make animal protein more
Hmm.
efficiently than animals can make it. Because at the end of the day, we know the technology is protein agnostic, so we can use it to produce any kind of animal protein. But the real challenge is how do you make it affordable for people? Because eggs, meat, and milk are still quite cheap. And so we needed to really solve that key challenge of can you actually get a microorganism like yeast to be better at making egg protein or animal protein than a chicken, right? Or an animal more broadly. And that's what we spent the last 6 years doing. And now that we have the platform built out, we're now monetizing the platform and launching products off the platform. And the first one we chose was a pig protein, because we thought, look, there's a real need right now. Most of the pepsin is kind of a sister protein to insulin, for example. It's found in the stomach, and it's the chief enzyme that helps break down other proteins. And so you go to Whole Foods or Walmart or any store that has supplements. In the supplement aisle, there is a section for digestive aids. And so it's a nutraceutical. And most of the products that are for digestion use pepsin to help people who have digestive issues break down proteins. So Pepto-Bismol actually got its name from
Yeah.
pepsin, and a
Mm.
bunch of other products. And so we can now, and all this pepsin is made from pigs today. And people don't know
Mm.
about this. And there are so many products in the food industry that use animal proteins like wine or Guinness. Guinness was still using fish bladders to filter their beer as of like 3 years
Wow.
ago. And people had no idea, right? And so
I
what
had
we
no
think
idea. Yeah.
like wine, a lot of the wine that is made is uses egg whites to clarify it, to get rid of, to clean up the color. And so we see that there's so much sort of legacy animal proteins in the food industry that are actually pretty expensive and really
Hmm.
terrible to source. And how can we make them cheaper and more efficiently and more sustainably, and essentially clean up the back end of the food industry? So we launched it last year, and we're now selling it across 3 continents. It's a profitable product,
Wow.
and we're really proud of that.
Fantastic. So how far out are you in fully emulating while replacing egg, right?
Yeah,
In the way that it's produced today without animals.
yeah. So I'm excited to share that in a couple of months,
Mm.
we are launching the world's first animal-free egg protein, which
Oh, fantastic.
you will find nationally across the U.S.
So excited, and I'm glad this is breaking here. You heard it here first. Fantastic. And I want to hear a little bit about that process, right? This when visions are huge and ambitious as yours, of course, it takes years. It took you years to get to this stage, and there's also a lot of challenges actually with fermentation, right? The
Yeah.
process itself. But you took a very interesting approach. I know you've had a partnership recently with Anheuser-Busch. And
Mhm.
you're tolling, I believe, at their facility as well. So talk to us a little bit about that approach of being willing
Yeah,
to think about yourselves as a drop in rather than doing the full end to end from the start.
exactly. We needed solutions to match the scale of the problems. And this problem is massive. Over 1 trillion eggs are consumed every single year. 1 trillion. It is one of the most ubiquitous protein sources on the face of the earth. And it is made using terrible production processes. These chickens don't, have literally the space of an iPad to move and live basically their entire lives. They will never see the sun. They will never walk on grass, and they're produced incredibly inefficiently as well because chickens have to not only grow, as a chicken, but then use some of that energy to produce that egg protein, and so it becomes a very inefficient process at scale. And we thought, look, we're using fermenters. We have developed the technology. Why do we have to do everything ourselves and take another 5, 10 years to do so when we can plug and play with the incumbent industry? And why not partner with AB InBev? They are the world's largest fermentation company. They have capacity unlike any other company in the world and a footprint in most regions on the planet. And so we thought, look, if we really want to do this at scale, do it affordably and really efficiently and quickly, why reinvent the wheel? So we partnered with AB InBev to work on, to work with us on the back end, on the production side, and then we're working with Ingredion, a Fortune 500 ingredients company, on the front end to do the distribution. They're in 120 countries. And we thought, look, this is they know this market really well. They sell agro placers today. They know they sell to almost every major food company on the planet. And so if we want to have a way to really drive impact, drive scale, and ultimately drive revenue and profit for the business, why not divide and conquer? Us focusing on what we think is the value that we're creating, which is on the protein side, on developing this core technology, and then working with two of the world's best companies to then drive scale and adoption so that we can get to, so we can really have a massive impact as quickly as we possibly could.
Interesting. My question to you is, if the world has always wanted this solution, why did it take so long to get here, and what is the landscape today? I mean, we have so many tailwinds, right? I mean, COVID is one, people becoming more aware of sustainability, the fact that Beyond Meat Impossible Burger almost started, I feel like, in the premium category.
Yeah.
So it's actually something that people who can afford it want it. But then now, of course, you're opening it up to the whole market. So how did you view sort of competition? Who else is in the ringer
Yeah.
here? Is Perfect Day a competitor? How are you viewing things?
Yeah, ultimately, Sarah, the challenge is like, when we started the company, we're the fifth oldest company in the space after Beyond Meat, Impossible, Just, and Perfect Day. We've been, when we started our companies, the world wasn't talking about alternative proteins. Like, this wasn't a thing. Like, now there's over 100 different companies, all in every corner of the alternative protein space. And the world is very different now. And there's a lot more, I think that can be done. There's a lot more capital and a lot more interest from consumers. And to your point, it is really a perfect storm because of all these incredible tailwinds. That wasn't the case 6 years ago, but in terms of the competitive landscape, there are two sort of fundamentally different approaches here. One is kind of working, the plant-based approach, which
Mhm.
you're using off-the-shelf technology for the most part. And so you can get to market much, much faster. Hence why Impossible, Beyond, and Just were able to get to market so quickly. And that's really exciting because you can drive adoption pretty aggressively. However, when you're using a deep technology approach like Perfect Day and ourselves, or some of the more kind of cell-based companies, the lead times to actually do the technology development, right? We are actually sourcing and creating our own ingredients, our own proteins. They're not off the shelf, and so there's typically on average, it's around 7 years to commercialize a product made using biotechnology. And so the timelines are pretty long. And so it's been a long time coming where we just had to be in R&D for the last 6 years to develop this. But now it's kind of all coming at once. We launched our pepsin, and then we're launching our egg protein in a couple of months. And then we're actually launching another protein in like 6 to 9 months. So it's all coming very quickly now that we've built the core technology. And then the other challenge in terms of driving adoption for us is scale, right? Even with working with AB InBev, that is not happening overnight, right? We also need to work with them to ultimately scale, also make sure that we're working with the FDA and the regulatory and everything is in place. So when we launch our products, we know that they are safe and affordable and accessible and delicious. And unfortunately, some of these things, we can rush, but we want to make sure we're getting it right because we can't play with food.
That's the key thing, right? With food, with health, when you have to go through those regulations, it's because it is detrimental. Like it's between life and death, and people don't realize this. It's not a SaaS company. It's not an incremental app that bug happens, you can update it, right? You can't take it back. So
the benefit here is also, yes, it takes longer to get there compared to SaaS for sure. But also like that, the barriers to entry are much, much higher as well. Right, for any company going into this space, we'll need to go through that same process. And so we now have a 5-year head start. We're the only company in the world today producing egg proteins using our fermentation technology. And so what we want to do now is really then cement our first mover advantage and drive adoption, because now, because we can build IP around our technology and also have, we need a lot of capital to get to where we are. It's just going to take longer for other companies to catch up, even if they wanted to come closely behind us. And so that also becomes an advantage that you can't just create an app, 2 days later after someone else launches. And so it becomes, these moats are very real. And then the size of the prize is also very real. I mean, the egg market is over $200 billion. And it's the same exact product in every country in the world, right? They're all eating the same exact egg for the most part. And so it becomes also, really attractive to be able to then rinse and repeat across the different regions of the world.
Yeah. So now that you're talking about different regions, a lot of we've had a couple of founders of unicorns on here, and I'm always curious about their mental model and thinking about partnerships and expansion. How did you approach that? I mean, you with Posing, it seems like it's 3 continents all at once. How did you think about this? Was this driven by yourself, or was it driven a lot by the partner that you're working with, i.e. Ingredion? How did you think about that?
I mean, really, it was the products telling us, like the customers, right? We try and really let the customers lead us. And we were, especially early on, you need customers that have very high pain points, who are really willing to basically allow you to mess up early on. And like that's something that maybe not all that people share, but like when you're scaling a business, when you're making product, things don't go perfectly the first time around. And so we have to, as we were shipping, we were working with customers that literally had no other option, and so were very kind in taking samples for us and allowing us to co-develop these products with them. And we would send them samples. They would say, this batch worked, but this one didn't. And then we would kind of go back and say, well, what happened here? And so that was really helpful. And a lot of these customers were sourced through Ingredion, as well as other consultants that we work with who have experience selling, for example, like animal-based pepsin. And the nice thing about what we're doing is we're not going into uncharted territory here. We're basically creating drop-ins for the proteins that people know and use today. And so it makes it a little easier where we say, well, who knows this market really well? Who's sold pepsin into the market already? Who buys these kinds of products? And we know that pretty easily. And so then we reach out to them, get some, and gauge their interest level, and then start working with them. And so we got a lot of traction in Europe and in Asia and in North America, in large part because those regions had the highest pain points, and they were actively trying to find alternatives. And so for our egg replacer, we're working with some of the world's largest egg users who've committed to going cage-free, but cannot find any alternative, because you can't get a cake to rise without using an egg. And so some of these companies have very high pain points that they're willing and eager to work with you even ahead of commercialization. And that's been really helpful for us. So we kind of let the pain points sort of drive our product development and ultimately our commercialization, because that's how we know we're going to that's how we know that we truly have a product market fit and that we're developing something that the market actually wants.
Sounds like for sure you're a disruptor, right? You're disrupting status quo.
Yeah.
And I talked about this earlier, the fact that it's taken so long. A lot of times we look at the world and there's a lot of problems, but people
Yeah.
have been benefiting from these inefficiencies, right? There are big farmhouses that benefit from the way things are. Are you afraid of being seen as that rebel and big companies coming after you? I mean, and even regulation in new markets, there could be lobbyists there. How are you thinking about this risk?
Yeah. I try to stay really focused on just executing and like what is a problem at hand today,
Mm.
because otherwise, to your point, if I, there are so many things that could go wrong, or there are so many things that could happen. And yes, one important part about being a CEO is managing that risk and also being able to continue pushing and kind of staying in my lane right there and staying focused, because what kills startups is not competition. What kills startups is not it is oftentimes not these external factors. What kills most companies are themselves. They are their biggest threat, and especially getting distracted. And that was something that a couple of advisors shared with me very early on, that I thought, okay, we need to stay laser focused, put my head down, and do this work that we find very meaningful. Because even if we own just 1% of the egg market, that's over $2 billion in revenue, right? In terms of like, these markets are so massive that just executing well enough to own 1%, we become a massive company. And so I've learned to focus and not get too worried about those things, because we know, I mean, fortunately in the US, the market is already massive. Even if we become successful here, I mean, and that's, I mean, fortunately, Latin America and a lot of other regions are very accepting of these technologies. The FDA has been approving products made using fermentation, proteins like ours, for 30 years. And so from a regulatory standpoint, we're, I think, in very, very good footing, because and that's why I love this technology itself, because it's been around for 40 years. So there's very little risk from that standpoint. And then two is the consumers really want this. And now there's a critical mass. It's not just us, but now there are dozens of companies, and we have now capital, right? We're now much larger. I think if you had asked me this 3, 4, 5 years ago, I would have been, far more concerned, because we were a little fish. Now, we have the ammunition, we have the capital, and we have the partnerships, not just me and my own volition. It is now our investor base and our partnership base that is going to also help us push this forward.
And I like that, right? I totally believe in abundance mentality. There's enough for everyone in this world, and especially if you're doing something right. And in
Yeah.
fact, you grow the pie, right? That's the beauty.
Exactly.
And I'm an egg enthusiast. As an Asian, I grew up with similar to eggs as well. First meal in the morning. But if you
Yeah.
can give me an alternative that tastes, feel, and has the same nutritional value, I'm all for it. So you're creating value with the exposure that you're building as well. So I'm curious then, are you thinking the vision for Clara Foods will be like now we see milk in the store, there's almond, oat
Yeah.
milk, rice, and all that. Is that going to be the future? What's your vision here?
Yeah, absolutely. Even the dairy space is still in its infancy, right? But we've seen that now happen with milk, where in the dairy section, to your point, cow milk used to dominate that category, and now you see a rainbow, right, of options. You have, to your point, the almond milk, the hazelnut milks, the macadamia milk, oat milk, hemp milk, you name it. Now there's an option for everyone, and that's the beauty of it, right? And what we want to do is just really give choice to people and have the market dictate and decide, really, is a product good enough to merit adoption? And for us, I think that that's only going to accelerate. But what I want to see, and what I truly believe will be the future of food, is that you will see that that across every major animal protein sort of market, the meat, milk, and eggs, or meat, dairy, and eggs, where the majority of products actually, like, there's going to be just a ton, so many more options. There's now more, to your point, the abundance mentality. I think with eggs, right now, 99.8% of the market is still eggs from chickens. There's less than 0.2% of the market that's dominated by anything that's not an egg. And so there is huge opportunity there. And I truly see this being a huge inflection point where we will start seeing that for the egg space as well. So that there's a lot more diversity and a lot more options. And eventually you're going to see the alternative protein products actually not be alternative, but actually be the mainstream. And then the animal-based versions are going to be the more expensive ones and the ones in the corners of the grocery store or the aisles, because at the end of the day, as these companies scale beyond Impossible, ourselves, scale is what factory farms have today. That's the only advantage. The efficiency standpoint is not there for those. And so once these companies like ours with AB InBev and others have scale, then at that point, it's really, at the end of the day, the invisible hand doing its work, where then ours end up dominating the market because unit economics dictates it.
Yeah, love it. Well, that's a good segue into billion-dollar questions. Quick questions, 8 of them in lucky Chinese fashion, right? I'm still Malaysian Chinese. 8 questions. First thing that comes to mind. Billion-dollar question number 1, Arturo. Common misconception about you.
I'm maybe like a little too kind. I think one of the things that I've learned over the last 6 years at Clara is I think just being really clear with my team. And I used to be very quiet and very soft growing up, and I think over the last 6 years, I've learned to balance both the niceness with, being clear.
Right. High is high and low is low.
The lowest low, I'll start with that one, which was laying off people. It is the worst experience ever. For me, it's a reflection. Every time like something happens, I have to reflect on myself and, like, what could I have done better? How could I have set this person up for success? And I really take that very personally. So every single time that happens, it is like a pit in my stomach, and something that has made me really invest in the hiring process for people. And then the highest high has been getting the call from Dave and Nisha that they wanted to work with me 7 years ago. It's still something that I never thought I would be living my purpose on this planet so early in my life. I feel very grateful.
You mentioned success there. When you think of the word successful, who do you think of and why?
I think of Greta Thunberg and AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And the reason why is because I love how unapologetic they are about the change they want to see in the world, like the bravery that entails to, even when people, may say and think like negative things about you, that you persevere in spite of that.
Worst advice given or that you've heard being given?
Don't pursue it because it's likely not going to work out. And I heard that when I was 16 and I wanted to go to Harvard. And I was this little, Mexican boy from Texas who had this big dream of wanting to go to Harvard. And I talked to a Harvard alum, and he was like, don't go. People like us don't do well in places like those. And that was very crushing, hearing it from the only person I'd ever met who had gone there from my hometown. Who had gone, 1 or 2 decades before I did, and it was very crushing. And I'm so glad that I didn't listen to him.
Yeah. So that's interesting, and I want to just unpack this one a little bit, because I had the first female NFL coach on, Coach Chen, and a person of authority like that as well, that she looked up to, a coach, told her that she would never make it. How do you, as a person that look up to someone in your mind as a young boy then, right, that fits who could be your role model, tell you that you can't do something, and then how do you flip that around for yourself?
I think there's always been a very defiant part of me that there was kind of like a screw you, I'm going to do it anyway. But in that moment, I was crushed, and I remember like I cried that night, because it really it was something that um, I was not expecting. Usually, people encourage you to pursue your dreams, even if you may be crazy, right? And especially someone to your point in the position of authority. I think the way that I reconciled it was, you know what, that's, I mean, over time, I rationalized it as that is one data point, and
Mm,
that's one data point, period.
yeah. Hardest lesson that you've had to learn as a leader?
Hardest lesson for me has been in really believing in myself.
Mm,
Like I think for such a long time I struggled with imposter syndrome. I mean, again, because of, you know, where I grew up in, and like at Harvard, I felt like I sometimes didn't belong because there weren't a lot of people who looked like me. And then, you know, leading a biotech company at 22, with no technical background was something that I was very self-conscious about. And I would wear blazers to work every day for the first couple of years because of that. And looking now at the data and like how much I have, with the group of with the help of others, I've succeeded. The company's doing incredibly well. We're crushing it. It's now my job to inspire and lead my team, and that I'm no longer the quarterback, but I am the coach, and really working to lead the team, not just for me anymore, but it's for others as well, to share this vision, to share this mission, and for me to really to really believe that what we are doing is not just possible, but inevitable, and really own that.
ah, love that. Love that so much. Well, that then the next one is almost like a roll on from that, but it's a best habit or a belief that you picked up in the last few years. So maybe pick the other one that changed your life.
It has been taking 5 or 10 minutes to get present with myself and get rid of technology. I was so addicted to my phone for so long, and like always being on and not having the
Mm,
time to really think and be with myself and with my thoughts. A habit that I love is I take showers with the lights off, and I just use that as a
mm,
time to think and get present with my thoughts. And then I was, here, and I was a little stressed out, and I just sat down, I
yeah.
breathed, and it changes. It's amazing how something so small can have such a big impact. But the rest of my day was, I was so much more relaxed after that, and it's something that I'm very grateful that I picked up, and actually through my therapy, which is also
Mm,
another habit that or investment that I've made in myself that
yeah.
I'm very grateful for.
Love that. And finally, this one doesn't have to be perfect, but a guilty pleasure that you still continue to do, practice that makes your life incrementally better.
Oh, I love being like just being a bum for a day and like eating pizza or like just some comfort like junk food with like family,
Yeah.
and like sleeping in on like a Sunday, and so that's been, uh yeah, I would say that's been a huge one. And then the other one is I love my dogs so much, and I try
Yeah.
to just spend as much time with them, and especially like on Sunday mornings, just kind of cuddling with them, and some pizza, has been is something that I'm
I
so
love it.
so
I just got a mental image of you, dogs, and pizza on the bed. I love it. Love it. Well, Arturo, thank you for that. And the reason I asked this is because the truth is, people think entrepreneurs that are successful, that you're this perfect vision of a person, that you do all the right things. It's all about hacks, right? Everything about productivity. But hey, we gotta enjoy life, and we're regular people as well that just are driven for the right reasons, hopefully.
Yeah, I completely agree. And that is one thing that I struggled with so much, is that I always had this idea of like who this perfect person, who I needed to be, right? And I needed to have my life together, and I needed to have, and I just thought I'm so far away from that ideal. And to your point, I think one of the biggest, the things that I'm most grateful for is having the ability to extend compassion to myself, to cut myself some slack. Like, hey, I'm doing okay. Like, I don't have to beat myself up because I had pizza on Sunday, because because I wanted to sleep in, because I didn't go to the gym. Like, that self-love is something that has markedly, fundamentally transformed the way that I navigate the world.
Love it. Well, Arturo, don't beat yourself up. You're doing fantastic. And I am so honored. Frankly, I'm so honored to have seen your journey from, your little lab. And we're going to put pictures up and I will visit you in this bigger version and maybe a bigger version. But so grateful for your leadership, Arturo, for spending this time and for your friendship. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you for the work that you do as well, and for this platform. I so appreciate it.